You flip a switch and the light turns on. I mean, it's binary, it's visible, it's comforting.
Right, you just expect it to work.
Exactly. We build our entire lives around the expectation of that mechanical precision. But right now, we are looking at a global landscape where someone just basically took a sledgehammer to the switchboard.
That is a very good way of putting it.
Because today is Thursday, March 12th, 2026. And exactly 13 days ago, on February 28th, the United States and Israel engaged in a war with Iran.
And the domino effect from that has been just staggering to watch.
It really has. What we are witnessing in the 13 days since is this sprawling, just a systemic failure of the institutions and the supply chains that actually keep the modern world functioning.
Yeah, we are watching the entire architecture of globalization undergo a stress test that, honestly, it was never designed to survive.
Not at all.
Because this isn't just some localized geopolitical event, you know? It's contagion. It bleeds into the algorithms dictating gig labor, the availability of chemical fertilizers, and even the foundational logic of our monetary policy.
And that is our mission for you today on this deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources in front of us.
Oh, it is a huge stack.
We are covering everything from naval combat in the Persian Gulf to the exact price of an Uber ride in Los Angeles right now. We've got the Pentagon blacklisting AI companies, and even the bureaucratic mechanics of how the U.S. verifies citizenship at the ballot box.
It sounds totally disconnected, but it really isn't.
Exactly. We are going to connect all these seemingly disparate dots into one clear picture of a global economy that is just breaking under pressure.
And the goal here is to strip away the panic for you and just understand the mechanics.
Right, because once you see how the gears interlock, the chaos actually starts to make a terrifying kind of sense. So, okay, let's unpack this.
To understand the failure of the broader machine, we really have to start by examining the single gear that jammed it.
The choke point.
Right, the geographic choke point.
You're talking about the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. It's this crescent-shaped body of water between Oman and Iran. And at its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are barely 2 miles wide in either direction.
2 miles is nothing.
It's tiny. But roughly a fifth of the world's global oil supply passes through that narrow channel. And right now, I mean, for all intents and purposes, commercial shipping there has completely ceased.
And the closure of the strait is directly tied to the leadership shift that literally just occurred in Tehran, right?
Yeah, just a few days ago.
On March 9th, Iran announced a new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. He's 56 years old, and he took power after his father was killed in the initial strikes on the very first day of the war.
Mojtaba Khamenei is widely analyzed by our sources as being far more hardline than his father.
Which is saying something.
It really is. The strategy he is employing right now is just a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. I mean, he knows he cannot defeat the United States Navy in a conventional symmetrical naval battle.
So he changes the rules of the game.
Exactly. He is weaponizing geography. By holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage, he is effectively holding the global economy hostage. He's using international markets as a secondary front in the war.
And what's wild is how he is communicating this strategy. It's this bizarre juxtaposition of modern tech and military aggression.
Oh, you mean his social media?
Yeah, he has a verified account on X, Twitter.
Right.
The handle is @Robarangalab, and it is continuously translating his decrees directly into English for a global audience.
Which is such a calculated move. It forces Western algorithms to amplify his threats.
Exactly. He is openly vowing to keep the strait closed, and he explicitly calls it a, quote, tool to pressure the enemy.
And at the same time, he's calling for U.S. military bases in the region to be shut down. He's signaling that any regional infrastructure supporting the West is a legitimate target.
Which obviously forces an immediate physical response from the international community.
Right. They can't just ignore that.
No. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was actually on Sky News, declaring that the U.S. Navy will start escorting commercial vessels through the strait as soon as militarily possible.
Which is a very loaded phrase.
Very. Bessent highlighted that the U.S. forces have already sunk 16 Iranian mine layers. But, I mean, sinking a mine layer doesn't magically make the water safe for a massive, unarmored commercial oil tanker, does it?
Not at all. I mean, a mine layer's entire purpose is to deploy explosive ordnance beneath the surface of the water.
Right, the mines are already out there.
Exactly. They are often untethered, floating mines that just drift with the currents. So even if you destroy the vessel that deployed them, the minefield already exists.
Wow. So the Navy has to clean that up first.
Yes. The U.S. military has to transition from offensive operations to this massive, slow, highly methodical, mine-sweeping operation. And until they do that, absolutely no commercial insurance company is going to underwrite a journey through that corridor.
And that perfectly explains the conflicting messaging coming out of Washington right now.
Yeah, because Treasury is saying one thing and Energy is saying another.
Exactly. The Treasury Secretary is projecting confidence, but then you have Energy Secretary Chris Wright on the record flat out stating that the Navy is not ready to escort tankers yet.
They just don't have the assets available.
Right. Their assets are currently tied up, destroying offensive capabilities. They simply do not have the bandwidth to play bodyguard for the commercial energy sector.
And the moment the market realized that the strait remains functionally blocked, the math just changed violently.
We crossed a major psychological and economic threshold. Brent crude officially crossed $100 a barrel for the first time since August 2022.
Let's actually unpack the mechanics of that oil pricing for a second, because our sources differentiate between Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate, or WTI.
Right. Brent is over $100, while WTI settled around $95.70. Why does that spread actually matter to you listening at home?
It is entirely about logistics and geography. So Brent crude is extracted from the North Sea.
Okay.
It's light, sweet, and critically, it is waterborne. Because it's extracted at sea, it's incredibly easy to load onto ships and transport globally.
So it's highly mobile.
Exactly. Therefore, Brent crude acts as the pricing benchmark for about 2/3 of the world's internationally traded oil. It dictates the price of global shipping and aviation.
While West Texas Intermediate, WTI, is domestic to the United States.
Correct. WTI is extracted from U.S. shale fields. It is heavily landlocked, primarily priced at these massive storage hubs in Cushing, Oklahoma.
So you can't just put it on a boat immediately.
Right. It is much harder to export quickly. So when a global maritime choke point like the Strait of Hormuz closes, Brent crude, the global waterborne oil, spikes harder and faster.
Because international buyers are just scrambling for whatever floating supply is left out there.
Exactly.
And the panic over that $100 threshold forced an unprecedented intervention. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, announced they're releasing 400 million barrels of emergency oil reserves.
Which is just a staggering number.
It is. And out of that 400 million, the United States is dumping 172 million barrels from our Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
It's literally the largest coordinated emergency release in the history of the global energy market.
But the wild thing is, the markets completely shrugged it off. The price just kept climbing.
Yeah, they didn't care at all.
If the U.S. government is dumping 172 million barrels into the market, why do the traders just ignore it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's because oil traders deal in physical reality, not political announcements.
All right.
Oil is not a digital asset. You cannot wire 1 million barrels of crude across the globe with a keystroke. It is a heavy, highly combustible physical commodity.
And it's physically stuck in the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve consists of these massive underground salt caverns in Texas and Louisiana.
You actually have to pump it out.
You have to pump it out of the salt caverns. Yeah. Then you have to secure space on specialized high-pressure pipelines. You have to move it to refineries or deep-water ports.
Wow, that's a lot of steps.
And it doesn't stop there. Then you have to secure the specialized Jones Act-compliant maritime vessels just to transport it. The physical and logistical bottlenecks are severe.
And our sources indicate it takes roughly 120 days for the U.S. release to actually hit the open market in any meaningful way.
Right. And for the European and Asian IEA members, the delay is still 60 to 90 days.
So releasing reserves right now is effectively like using a bucket to bail out a flooded basement. Or, mailing a fire extinguisher to a house that is currently burning down.
That's a great analogy. Analysts at Raymond James were super explicit about this. They said 400 million barrels is a massive number on paper, but the market requires liquidity today.
Not in 4 months.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, drawing down these emergency stockpiles signals to the commodity markets that the IEA believes this conflict is going to be protracted.
Oh, that makes sense. They wouldn't tap the emergency fund if they thought it would end tomorrow.
Right. They're draining the emergency fund, which means eventually the government will have to buy all that oil back to refill the reserves.
Potentially at even higher prices.
Yes, which establishes a long-term floor for how low oil prices can actually drop in the future.
The physical reality of moving those barrels brings us to the immediate casualty of this crisis. Because a choke point in the Middle East doesn't just stop oil, it stops the modern world from moving and eating.
It breaks the entire transportation network.
Exactly. The aviation sector is the most immediate proxy for a global energy shock. The data from Argus in our sources is just staggering.
What are we looking at there?
Jet fuel has spiked over 60% since the attacks began.
Wow.
To put that into perspective, if you wanted to fill up the fuel tanks of a standard Boeing 737-800 on February 27th, the day before the war started, the raw fuel cost was about $17,000.
Okay.
Just days later, that exact same fill-up cost over $27,000.
That is just brutal. We have to look at the mechanics of an airline's balance sheet here. Jet fuel is not some incidental expense.
Right.
It is generally their second largest operational cost, right behind human labor.
Okay.
It often accounts for 20% to 30% of their total overhead.
And airlines already operate on notoriously thin profit margins.
Exactly. So when your second largest expense increases by 60% in a 10-day window, the fundamental math of the enterprise just collapses.
The airlines are scrambling to rewrite the rules of their pricing models in real time. Cathay Pacific announced they are doubling their fuel surcharges.
Doubling them.
Yep. Scandinavian Airlines is broadly raising ticket prices across all routes. Air New Zealand took this really extraordinary step of completely pulling their financial earnings outlook because their predictive models literally cannot account for this level of volatility.
And the geographical closure forces operational inefficiencies, which just compound the fuel costs even more.
What do you mean by that?
Consider the airspace closures over the Middle East. Qantas is the perfect example of this.
Right, the Australian airline.
Yeah, they operate a highly lucrative, direct, long-haul flight from Perth to London.
Oh, wow. That's a long flight.
It is. But with the Middle Eastern airspace deemed an active war zone, they cannot fly their optimal fuel-efficient route. They have to divert.
And a diversion means a longer flight path,
which requires burning more fuel. And the crazy part is, the aircraft literally cannot carry enough fuel to make the diverted journey in a single bound.
Wait, really?
Yes. So Qantas is now forcing a layover in Singapore solely to refuel the aircraft before continuing to Europe.
That sounds like a nightmare for the airline and the passengers.
It is. They are degrading the customer experience, burning more of a commodity that just spiked 60% in price, and increasing the wear and tear on their airframes all at once.
Yet, despite this structural collapse of the pricing model, passenger demand remains incredibly stubborn. Qantas reported that their flights to London and Paris are still operating at over 90% capacity.
People still want to travel.
The consumer has not yet accepted the new economic reality. Travel experts in our sources are actually advising consumers to avoid restrictive basic economy tickets.
Basically telling them to buy the insurance.
Essentially telling people to pay a premium for flexibility because the pricing environment is entirely untethered from historical norms right now.
But, canceling a summer vacation to Paris is a luxury problem.
It really is.
The structural failure of the global supply chain goes much, much deeper than commercial aviation. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply an artery for carbon energy. It is the central nervous system for global agriculture.
This brings us to a terrifying secondary effect, the fertilizer choke point.
Right. Most people do not associate the Persian Gulf with farming.
I definitely didn't.
But modern agriculture is entirely dependent on synthetic chemistry. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman are massive global suppliers of traded urea and phosphates.
Or raw materials.
Exactly. The raw materials and the finished chemical compounds required to grow food at scale almost exclusively transit through the Strait of Hormuz.
And according to the International Food Policy Research Institute, we are looking at a cascading agricultural failure. A researcher at the University of Texas pointed out that sub-Saharan Africa is 90% import dependent for its fertilizer.
Let's examine the mechanics of that dependency, because it's grim. Nitrogen-intensive crops, primarily maize, are the foundational dietary staple across sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay.
And maize aggressively depletes nitrogen from the soil. So if a farmer cannot access urea to replenish that nitrogen, or if the global price spike makes the fertilizer mathematically unprofitable to purchase,
they just use less of it.
Exactly. They apply less. And if the soil lacks nitrogen, the biological yield of the crop plummets.
The harvest shrinks.
Yes. When the harvest shrinks on a continent entirely dependent on those yields, you transition very quickly from an economic inflation story to a localized famine story.
It's terrifying.
And the cruelty of agricultural economics is that the financial pain outlasts the geopolitical conflict.
Our sources describe this dynamic using the rockets and feathers effect. Walk us through how that mechanism actually targets the consumer.
Sure. So the rockets and feathers effect is this known phenomenon in supply chain pricing. When the cost of a foundational raw material, in this case, chemical fertilizer or crude oil spikes due to a shock, the retail price for the end consumer shoots up instantly, like a rocket.
Right, they pass the cost on immediately.
Exactly. The agricultural conglomerates, the transport companies, the grocery chains, they immediately pass those increased operational costs onto you, the consumer, to protect their quarterly profit margins.
But when the war eventually ends and the strait reopens, the prices do not drop like a rock.
No, they float down slowly, like a feather.
Why is that?
There are two mechanisms driving this. First, physical inventory. A distributor may have purchased thousands of tons of fertilizer at the absolute peak of the panic pricing.
Oh, I see.
They refuse to sell that inventory at a loss just because the spot price of the commodity dropped a month later. They will hold the retail price artificially high until they clear that expensive inventory.
And the second mechanism, let me guess, just raw corporate opportunism.
Precisely. If consumers demonstrate that they are capable of paying $5 for a loaf of bread, the grocery chain has very little incentive to voluntarily lower the price back to $3 simply because their underlying costs decreased.
The consumer base has essentially been conditioned to accept the new price floor.
Right. Therefore, even if a ceasefire in Iran is signed tomorrow, the global food shock is already mathematically baked into the soil for the next planting season. The inflation is permanent.
Wow. And we see this exact same asymmetric pain playing out in the global currency markets, too.
Oh, definitely.
Emerging markets are bearing the brunt of this shock. The Indian rupee is sliding dangerously close to an exchange rate of 94 against the US dollar.
What's fascinating here is that India is just a textbook case study in hyper-connected fragility.
How so?
Well, India is one of the fastest-growing major economies on the planet, but it is heavily reliant on imported energy to fuel that growth. And the structural problem is that global oil is priced and traded in US dollars.
So if Brent crude spikes over $100 a barrel, India doesn't just suffer the cost of the oil itself.
No, they suffer the currency exchange penalty on top of it.
Right.
As the global panic drives investors into the perceived safety of the US dollar, the dollar strengthens. Simultaneously, India has to sell massive amounts of rupees to acquire the dollars necessary to buy the hyperinflated oil.
And flooding the market with rupees drives the value of the rupee down.
Exactly. It is a vicious compounding cycle. The Reserve Bank of India is burning through their foreign exchange reserves right now, trying to intervene and stabilize the currency. But it is practically a mathematical impossibility to fight a global commodity supercycle like this.
So a localized naval conflict in a 2-mile-wide strait instantly taxes a Thai farmer's chemical inputs, evaporates the purchasing power of an Indian commuter, and shatters the business model of a London-bound traveler's airline.
The interconnectedness just guarantees that the shockwaves eventually reach the shores of the United States, too.
Which transitions us from the macroeconomic theory of global shipping lanes directly onto Main Street America. Because how does this translate to your own backyard?
Oh, at the pump.
Exactly. The pain at the pump is the translation layer. It's where abstract geopolitical warfare becomes a visceral, unavoidable tax on the American worker.
And the domestic data is brutal. The average price of unleaded gas spiked 22% in a matter of days, hitting $3.59 a gallon.
22% in days.
Yes. The Schwab Center for Financial Research confirmed this is the steepest 10-day gas price spike on record.
To really understand the damage of a 22% overnight spike, we have to look at the gig economy. Gig workers are basically the canary in the coal mine for economic distress because they operate with zero institutional padding.
They have no safety net.
None. Millions of Americans rely on their personal vehicles as the sole engine of their income: rideshare drivers, food delivery couriers, independent freight dispatchers.
Let's examine the underlying mechanism of gig work for a second. These workers are not employees. They are independent contractors interfacing with algorithmic management.
Right, the app tells them what to do.
And the algorithm dictates their base pay per job. So when gas goes up 22%, the workers' operational costs explode, but they possess absolutely no collective bargaining power to force Uber or DoorDash to increase their compensation proportionately.
The worker absorbs 100% of the shock.
Every single penny.
Our sources profile 2 individuals trapped in this exact mechanism. Alvaro Bolanes is an Uber driver in Los Angeles who has been driving for over a decade.
He's a veteran at this.
He is. And he noted he has never seen the economic environment change this violently. He is actively altering his labor strategy, literally refusing to accept shorter rides because the immediate upfront cost of the gasoline renders the algorithm's payout mathematically unprofitable.
He is forced to optimize for fuel efficiency over total ride volume, which inherently limits his earnings ceiling. He literally cannot make as much money as he used to.
Then you have Adrienne Musio, a courier for DoorDash and Uber Eats in Pennsylvania. She is taking the extreme measure of walking to the local convenience store for her own personal errands simply to preserve the gasoline in her tank for her working hours.
Wow.
Her vehicle is no longer a tool for personal freedom. It is strictly a commercial asset that is too expensive to operate for leisure.
A researcher from the University of Pennsylvania highlighted that gig work is already fundamentally unstable. I mean, it relies on the illusion of flexibility.
Be your own boss, set your own hours.
Right. But when the underlying cost of mobility spikes, the flexibility just evaporates. These workers are trapped in an algorithmic vice, forced to subsidize the delivery networks with their own shrinking profit margins.
And this localized pain, the pump and the hustle, is feeding into a broader macroeconomic terror. The combination of inflation and a freezing labor market brings up a term that haunts the Federal Reserve.
The S word.
Stagflation.
Yeah, stagflation. High inflation combined with stagnant economic growth and rising unemployment. It is the defining economic nightmare of the 1970s.
And Ed Yardeni, a veteran market analyst, put the odds of a 1970s-style stagflation occurring right now at a staggering 35%.
Because the structural ingredients are perfectly aligned. Inflation has been stubbornly holding around 2.4%, which refuses to drop to the Federal Reserve's mandated 2% target.
Right.
But simultaneously, the engine of the economy is sputtering. In February, the U.S. economy actually lost 92,000 jobs, and the unemployment rate tipped up to 4.4%.
Let's try to visualize the Federal Reserve's dilemma here. I think managing the economy is sort of like driving a car.
Okay, I like that.
Inflation is the accelerator stuck to the floor. The economy is running too hot. Prices are out of control. To fix that, the Fed pulls the emergency brake. They raise interest rates to make borrowing money incredibly expensive, which slows down spending and cools inflation.
But the freezing labor market, those 92,000 lost jobs, means the car's brakes have completely failed.
Exactly. So the Fed is essentially trapped in a burning room with no water, or in this car with a stuck accelerator and broken brakes. If they pull the emergency brake and keep interest rates high to fight the inflation caused by $100 oil, the car spins out, businesses can't afford to borrow money, and the labor market freezes to death.
But if they take their hand off the brake and lower interest rates to stimulate hiring,
they pour gasoline on the inflation fire, and the car accelerates into a brick wall.
It is an impossible binary. Prior to the conflict in Iran, the futures markets were optimistically betting on the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates as early as June.
Right. Everyone wanted a summer rate cut.
That optimism has vanished. Traders have entirely priced out summer interest rate cuts.
Completely gone.
The current consensus is that the market might see one single rate cut in December, and then absolutely nothing else until well into 2027 or 2028.
Wow.
Chair Jerome Powell and the Fed are signaling that fighting the inflation imported from the Strait of Hormuz is their primary non-negotiable mandate, even if the domestic labor market has to bleed to achieve it.
And this economic tightrope is precarious enough on its own, but it is currently being subjected to massive political crosswinds in Washington.
It really is.
Now, we must be absolutely clear with you, the listener, before we dive into this. We are examining these political developments strictly through the lens of how they impact market certainty and macroeconomic policy.
Right. We are impartially reporting the mechanics of the gridlock without taking any stance on the validity of the political maneuvers themselves.
Exactly. No sides being taken here. So the core conflict is a fundamental disagreement over monetary strategy. President Trump is publicly demanding immediate, drastic interest rate cuts to stimulate the economy and support the labor market.
He has utilized social media to aggressively criticize Chair Jerome Powell for maintaining high rates and moving too slowly.
And to force a change in strategy, the president officially nominated Kevin Warsh to take over as the new chairman of the Federal Reserve.
But the nomination process, the actual bureaucratic machinery required to install new leadership, is completely jammed up.
Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican who sits on the banking committee, is actively blockading the nomination.
Right. Senator Tillis is employing a procedural blockade, refusing to advance any nominees for the Federal Reserve.
And what's the stated reason for that?
The stated reason for this blockade is an ongoing Department of Justice criminal investigation into current chair Jerome Powell.
And according to statements made by Powell herself, he believes this DOJ probe was initiated specifically because he and the other Fed board members refused to comply with the president's demands to cut interest rates on an accelerated timeline.
Which is a massive accusation.
Huge. But again, we are not evaluating the merits of the DOJ probe or the president's monetary philosophy.
We are looking at the functional result.
Yes, and the functional result is that the Central Bank of the United States is essentially paralyzed by a political standoff in the exact moment a global supply shock requires decisive, unified economic management.
Because markets require a foundation of certainty to function efficiently.
They hate uncertainty.
They despise it. When the institution designed to act as the ultimate stabilizer of the economy is itself destabilized by procedural blockades and investigations, it just amplifies the volatility.
It makes everything worse.
It exacerbates the fear of stagflation because capital allocators do not know who will be steering the ship in 6 months, let alone what their monetary philosophy will actually be.
And this inflationary environment creates bizarre, counterintuitive winners and losers based entirely on how different demographics are legally tethered to the economy.
Like the seniors.
Right. For instance, the mechanical rules of inflation might actually provide a massive benefit to senior citizens.
This is due to the cost of living adjustment, or COLA, built into Social Security.
How does that differ from the gig workers we talked about?
Well, unlike gig workers who absorb inflation directly with no protection, Social Security payouts are structurally indexed to the Consumer Price Index.
Oh, so it's automatic.
It's a mechanical adjustment designed to protect retirees from losing purchasing power when the cost of basic goods rises.
And preliminary estimates from analysts like Mary Johnson indicate that if the oil shock continues driving up household costs, the 2027 COLA could jump to 2.8%.
The federal government will automatically increase their income to match the inflation.
But contrast that structural protection with the reality facing young people carrying student loan debt. While seniors receive an automatic raise, the bureaucratic guardrails protecting student borrowers are actively being dismantled.
We have a comprehensive report from the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, detailing a massive structural shift at the Department of Education.
Yeah, the Trump administration recently terminated approximately 50% of the staff at the Federal Student Aid Office.
Half the staff. And the GAO report explicitly details the functional consequence of those cuts. The Department of Education literally lacks the manpower to assess and monitor student loan servicers, companies like Mohela, on the accuracy of their billing practices and the quality of their customer service.
The oversight mechanism has just been hollowed out.
Completely. And the history of these servicers requires rigorous oversight.
Didn't they have issues before?
Well, absolutely. The Biden administration previously had to withhold millions of dollars in payments from Mohela because the company failed to send timely billing statements to borrowers.
Right, I remember that.
That administrative failure directly caused hundreds of thousands of individuals to become delinquent on their loans, severely damaging their credit scores through absolutely no fault of their own.
So, precisely when inflation is eroding the disposable income of young professionals, the federal oversight designed to prevent predatory or incompetent billing practices on 42 million Americans with student debt is removed.
Which perfectly exposes the profound generational and class divide defining this economy right now. We are not looking at a single unified economic experience anymore.
No, we are watching two completely parallel universes operating simultaneously, governed by entirely different sets of roles.
Universe A is defined by friction, underemployment, and the daily struggle against localized inflation. Universe B is defined by the massive accumulation of capital, the defense boom, and the flight to hard assets.
Let's analyze the mechanics of Universe A first. The Federal Reserve of New York published a statistic that essentially defines the millennial and Gen Z economic experience right now.
What's the number?
42.5% of recent college graduates, individuals aged 22 to 27 holding a bachelor's degree, are officially underemployed.
Underemployed, meaning they are working in roles that do not require the academic credentials they spent 4 years and tens of thousands of dollars acquiring.
Right. They're working as baristas, retail associates, or driving for Uber.
It is the highest rate of underemployment for this specific demographic since the chaotic labor markets of October 2020.
They are earning depressed wages while simultaneously absorbing a 22% spike in gasoline and the lingering inflation of groceries.
There's a trap.
Our sources provide a suite of actionable financial tactics targeted at these underemployed graduates. But rather than just listing the apps, let's break down the macroeconomic strategy behind why these tactics are necessary.
The overarching strategy for Universe A is defensive capital preservation.
Okay, break that down.
When inflation is high, the purchasing power of your money is actively decaying. Every dollar you hold buys less food today than it did yesterday. So the first tactic is aggressively severing fixed costs.
The sources suggest utilizing automated tools like Rocket Money for this, right?
Yes. The tool links directly to your bank accounts, identifies recurring subscriptions that you may have forgotten about, and utilizes automated scripts to cancel them or negotiate the monthly rate down.
The strategy here is basically just stopping the passive bleed of capital.
Exactly. Plug the holes in the boat first. The second tactic is strategic yield generation. Holding cash in a traditional checking account that yields maybe 0.07% interest during an inflationary period is a mathematical guarantee of losing wealth.
So what's the alternative?
The strategy requires moving liquid capital into high-yield savings accounts, such as the product offered by Western Alliance Bank, which currently provides a 3.8% annual percentage yield with unlimited withdrawals.
Explain how that APY actually works as a defensive shield for someone.
If inflation is running at 2.4% and your money is earning 3.8% in a high-yield account, the interest you are earning outpaces the rate at which your purchasing power is decaying.
You are essentially generating a real return of 1.4%.
Right. It is the only way to prevent your emergency fund from evaporating in value.
The third tactic is pivoting labor strategies away from capital-intensive work. We discussed Alvaro, the Uber driver, struggling with gas prices.
Right. His overhead is killing him.
Exactly. So the sources suggest transitioning to zero overhead side hustles. Platforms like Depop allow users to leverage arbitrary assets, like reselling vintage clothing, without incurring transportation costs.
Or Fiverr.
Yeah, Fiverr allows underemployed grads to monetize digital skills, graphic design, copywriting, coding, where the only operational cost is an internet connection, entirely bypassing the pain at the gas pump.
Finally, the most critical defensive maneuver is liability management, specifically regarding credit cards. If an underemployed graduate is forced to carry a balance to afford basic necessities right now, they are likely paying an average interest rate exceeding 22%.
And the compounding math on 22% interest is financially lethal.
It is a death spiral. The strategic maneuver here is executing a balance transfer to a 0% APR credit card, such as the Wells Fargo Reflect card, which offers 21 months of zero interest.
That's almost 2 years.
Right. By moving the debt, you are effectively leveraging the bank's capital for almost 2 years without paying a penalty, giving yourself a window to aggressively pay down the principal before the high interest rates kick back in.
And they can use tools to help qualify for those, right?
Yes, additionally, leveraging data aggregation tools like Experian Boost allows consumers to link their utility and streaming payments directly to their credit profile. It artificially bumps their FICO score to ensure they qualify for those 0% transfer cards in the first place.
That is the exhausting, highly tactical reality of Universe A. You're constantly moving digital money around just to afford groceries and protect your credit score.
It's a full-time job just surviving.
But now, let's step into Universe B.
Universe B. It is experiencing a parabolic explosion of wealth, entirely insulated from the inflation of consumer goods. It is driven primarily by the industrial mechanics of global warfare.
While Main Street is paralyzed by stagflation fears, the defense sector is experiencing a golden age. The war in Iran, compounding the ongoing structural demand of the war in Ukraine, has transformed European defense companies into the most lucrative growth engines on the market.
We are looking at multi-generational shifts in defense procurement here. Leonardo, the massive Italian defense conglomerate, just announced their strategic plan to double their profit margins by the year 2030.
Double them.
Rheinmetall, the primary German arms manufacturer, is projecting a 45% increase in total sales for this year alone.
Wow.
Saab, the Swedish aerospace and defense contractor, reported that their order intake shot up by an astonishing 284%.
The CEO of Rheinmetall was incredibly blunt on an earnings call with investors. He explicitly stated that over the next 10 years, there is a, quote, huge need for their munitions and armor to supply the United States and its European allies.
The tragedy of geopolitical conflict is simultaneously a massive, highly predictable business model.
It really is. And the wealth generated at the apex of Universe B by defense executives, institutional investors, and tech founders is actively seeking a safe harbor.
They want somewhere to put all that cash.
They are executing a massive flight to safety, but they are not just buying treasury bonds or gold bullion. They are buying tangible, hyper-exclusive physical assets.
Like collectibles.
Exactly. In a single week, while the stock market was violently convulsing over the $100 oil threshold, the ultra-wealthy deployed over $600 million into classic cars and fine art.
$600 million in a week.
Yeah. The highlight was a baby blue 2005 Porsche Carrera GT that crossed the auction block at Amelia Island in Florida and sold for $6.7 million.
Drew Watson, the head of art services at Bank of America, analyzed this behavior as a return to quality. We have to understand the mechanics of hard asset investing.
Break that down for us.
When the macroeconomic environment becomes deeply volatile, when interest rates are unpredictable and supply chains are collapsing, billionaires lose faith in abstract digital equities. They want assets that possess intrinsic physical scarcity.
They want things they can physically touch and control, like a Francis Bacon painting that sells for $21.5 million, or a Henry Moore sculpture that commands $35 million.
Exactly. A 2005 Porsche Carrera GT has a strictly limited production run. Its value is not tethered to the quarterly earnings report of a tech company or the interest rate decisions of the Federal Reserve.
It's insulated.
Right. It is an insulated store of value that simultaneously serves as a status symbol.
And the head of Broad Arrow Auctions provided a fascinating psychological profile of these buyers. This new generation of ultra-wealthy individuals, primarily tech founders in their 30s and 40s, are fundamentally desensitized to global chaos.
How so?
Well, their entire adult lives have been defined by black swan events. The 2008 financial crisis, a global pandemic, historic inflation, the Russia-Ukraine war, and now a Middle Eastern conflict.
So they've just internalized the chaos.
Exactly. They tune out the noise of the stock market and park their capital in a $6.7 million hypercar because it is completely immune to the price of gasoline.
However, this massive accumulation of capital-seeking physical assets is creating a severe political friction point when that capital targets the single most critical physical asset in the American economy.
Residential housing.
Residential housing.
Which brings us to a monumental piece of legislation on the Senate floor. The Senate just passed what is being described as the largest housing affordability bill in 30 years.
And this is a big deal.
Huge. The absolute centerpiece of this legislation, which was heavily championed by President Trump, is a strict prohibition on investors and private equity firms from owning more than 350 single-family homes.
We need to examine the mechanics of how private equity actually operates in the housing market and why this specific cap was designed.
Give us the history there.
Following the 2008 foreclosure crisis, massive institutional investors realized they could buy distressed single-family homes at a massive discount, bundle them into these huge portfolios, and rent them back to the population.
Treating suburban neighborhoods like dividend-yielding stock portfolios.
Exactly. Now, the new legislation allows companies to build new homes, the build-to-rent model, but legally mandates that the corporation must sell those properties to individual buyers after 7 years.
They are structurally forbidden from hoarding the inventory in perpetuity.
Right. Now, maintaining strict impartiality here, we must look at how this mechanism is being debated, because it creates some really strange political bedfellows.
Absolutely. On one side, you have figures like Progressive Senator Elizabeth Warren forming an ideological alliance with President Trump.
Which you don't see every day.
No, you don't. The argument supporting the bill is that residential homes are fundamental societal infrastructure meant for families, not financial instruments for Wall Street.
Right. Proponents argue that private equity firms possess access to billions in low-interest institutional capital, allowing them to outbid average families with all-cash offers.
Which artificially restricts the supply of available homes.
And structurally drives up both home prices and rental rates.
But on the opposing side, you have the National Association of Home Builders and the Mortgage Bankers Association vehemently arguing that the legislation will trigger a catastrophic failure in housing development.
Their argument centers entirely on the incentives of capital investment.
Right.
If a developer is legally forced to liquidate a build-to-rent community after exactly 7 years, the long-term profitability model collapses. They argue that capital will simply flee the housing sector entirely.
Which completely kills the incentive to build new rental units.
Exactly, which they argue will paradoxically create a massive shortage of available rentals and deeply hurt lower-income Americans who rely on that inventory.
It is a profound debate over the structural ownership of the American landscape. Even within the Democratic Party, there is division. Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii voted against the bill, publicly calling the 350 home cap arbitrary and warning it will wreck the commercial rental market.
But the political momentum was overwhelming.
Yeah, the bill cleared the Senate with an 89-10 vote. It still faces a grueling battle in the House of Representatives, but it perfectly illustrates the tension of Universe B capital colliding with Universe A survival.
Absolutely. We have physical warfare over the shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz. We have physical billionaires hoarding physical paintings to hide their wealth. We have the Senate attempting to legislate the physical ownership of suburban homes.
But the sources indicate that the most consequential war currently being fought is entirely abstract,
It is happening in the digital realm.
deep inside the architecture of artificial intelligence.
This is where the structural rules of the future are being written in real time. The Pentagon has officially designated Anthropic, one of the premier, most advanced artificial intelligence companies in the United States, as a, quote, supply chain risk.
We really need to understand the magnitude of that label. Historically, the designation of a supply chain risk by the Department of Defense is a nuclear option strictly reserved for foreign adversaries.
It's the label applied to Chinese telecommunications giants like Huawei or hostile foreign drone manufacturers.
Applying it to an American AI startup based in San Francisco is a legally and culturally unprecedented maneuver.
And the justification provided for this blacklist exposes a massive philosophical collision between the culture of Silicon Valley and the requirements of the military-industrial complex.
What did they actually say?
The Defense Department's Chief Technology Officer, Emil Michael, explicitly stated on CNBC that Anthropic's AI model, known as Claude, would fundamentally pollute the military supply chain.
Walk us through the mechanics of that pollution. How does an algorithm pollute a weapons system?
It comes down to how the neural network is actually trained. Anthropic was founded by a team of highly safety-conscious researchers who originally splintered off from OpenAI.
Okay.
They engineered a mechanism called constitutional AI directly into Claude's foundational architecture. They quite literally wrote a constitution, a set of ethical rules and behavioral guardrails that forces the AI to prioritize being helpful, harmless, and honest.
The code is mathematically weighted to balance complex trade-offs with compassion to actively avoid generating harmful outcomes.
And the Pentagon views that compassion as a structural vulnerability.
Which is wild to think about.
The Pentagon CTO stated, and this is a direct quote, "We can't have a company that has a different policy preference that is baked into the model through its constitution, its soul. Pollute the supply chain so our warfighters are getting ineffective weapons."
He utilized the concept of a digital soul.
He did. The United States military is actively blacklisting millions of lines of code because it believes the algorithmic ethics governing that code are too hesitant, too harmless, to be integrated into lethal targeting systems.
And Anthropic is aggressively contesting this. They have filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, arguing that the blacklist is arbitrary, irreparably damaging their corporate reputation, and putting hundreds of millions of dollars in federal contracts in jeopardy.
But the administrative mandate is immediately crashing into the practical reality of how defense contractors actually operate.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Can you actually ban a piece of code that your own defense contractors are already relying on in the middle of a war?
Consider the friction of trying to untangle artificial intelligence from modern military infrastructure. It is not a localized program you can simply uninstall.
Palantir is the perfect example here, right?
Yes, Palantir is one of the most embedded, powerful defense data analytics companies on Earth. And their CEO, Alex Karp, just casually admitted in a public forum that Palantir is actively using Anthropic's Claude model right now to support the ongoing military operations in Iran.
Wait, really? Even with the blacklist?
Yes. It reveals the total inability of bureaucratic mandates to keep pace with technological integration. Emil Michael, the Pentagon CTO, conceded this reality. He admitted, this is not just Outlook where you could delete it from your desktop.
Because Claude is deeply embedded in the neural networks analyzing satellite telemetry, processing logistics, and synthesizing battlefield intelligence.
Exactly. The Pentagon demands AI that accelerates the kill chain with ruthless efficiency, but the private corporations building the most advanced AI are hard-coding their models to prioritize safety over destruction. It is an abstract ethical debate manifesting in real-time military operations.
While the military wrestles with the existential ethics of algorithmic souls, the consumer tech sector is aggressively deploying AI into the most mundane aspects of daily life to capture user attention.
Like Google.
Yeah, Google just announced a massive integration called Ask Maps.
The mechanics of this integration are designed to create a closed ecosystem. Google is injecting their Gemini AI model directly into the Google Maps interface.
Historically, Maps was just a directional utility. You searched for a specific restaurant, it gave you the route.
Right, Ask Maps transforms it into a conversational spatial intelligence engine.
You don't search for a coffee shop anymore. You ask the AI a highly complex, multivariable question. You ask, my phone is dying, I have 10 minutes. Where can I charge it without waiting in a long line for coffee?
Or, find me a public tennis court within 3 miles that currently has the lights turned on.
The AI synthesizes real-time user data, historical foot traffic patterns, and spatial geography to generate a hyper-specific answer.
And the strategic goal is retention. Google wants to prevent the user from ever leaving the Maps app to verify information on a third-party website or a social media platform. They want to be the sole intermediary for your physical interaction with the real world.
And speaking of interacting with the physical world, the consumer technology sector is attempting to leverage the macroeconomic pain we discussed earlier to accelerate their own product adoption.
You mean the EV sector?
Yes, the electric vehicle market views the $3.59 gasoline panic not as a crisis, but as an absolute marketing gift.
Because the EV sector operates on the premise that upfront capital expenditure is offset by long-term operational savings. When the operational cost of an internal combustion engine spikes by 22% in 10 days, the EV value proposition becomes significantly more attractive to the average consumer.
And Rivian is attempting to capitalize on this window by officially launching their R2 midsize SUV this spring.
The mechanics of Rivian's pricing strategy are critical here. The initial launch package of the R2 is priced around $58,000.
That remains a premium luxury vehicle.
It does. But their stated aggressive target is to scale manufacturing to offer a $45,000 entry-level model by 2027.
And the R2 is an existential product for Rivian. The company is currently burning through massive amounts of capital reserves. They require the R2 to achieve mass market volume to compete directly with the dominance of the Tesla Model Y.
If they cannot scale production and lower the price point, the company's financial runway is severely limited.
Then you have Lucid Motors, which is taking an entirely different, incredibly audacious approach. Lucid just held an investor day where they promise they will achieve positive free cash flow by the end of the decade.
Which is a bold claim.
They plan to achieve this by expanding into mid-size vehicles and aggressively entering the autonomous robotaxi market.
Lucid previewed a specialized 2-seat robotaxi vehicle and simultaneously announced a strategic partnership with Uber. They are publicly claiming that their proprietary autonomous driving technology will reach parity with Tesla's full self-driving capabilities by next year.
But consider the financial reality of that timeline. This is an incredibly ambitious projection for a company that reported a net loss of $2.7 billion last year.
It's massive.
They are essentially telling investors to ignore the massive capital bleed today because they are going to solve the hardest software engineering problem on Earth Level 5 autonomy within 12 months.
It is a massive gamble that the promise of a driverless future will keep the investment capital flowing.
We are witnessing a systemic rewriting of the rules across every institutional pillar, military, corporate, and cultural. The architecture of the previous era is being dismantled.
We see it in the executive ranks of the tech monopolies. Rajesh Jha, the legendary executive who supervised the entire Microsoft Office ecosystem, just announced his retirement after 35 years at the company.
He was the architect leading the charge to integrate OpenAI's models into Microsoft 365 Copilot. Losing a general of that caliber right in the middle of the most aggressive technological arms race in Silicon Valley history introduces a massive variable of uncertainty for Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella.
And the rewriting of the rules extends deeply into social policy, too. Look at how international governments are scrambling to regulate the impact of social media algorithms on the psychological development of children.
The regulatory divergence here is fascinating. The UK regulators, specifically Ofcom and the Information Commissioner's Office, just officially rejected a proposed legislative blanket ban on social media for teenagers under the age of 16.
This is in stark contrast to Australia, which recently passed a draconian structural ban, resulting in Meta actively blocking 500,000 accounts.
The mechanics of the UK's regulatory philosophy are based on the reality of digital friction. The UK regulators argue that implementing a blunt blanket ban is counterproductive because teenagers are digitally native. They will inevitably utilize VPNs and bringer accounts to bypass the geographical blocks.
So instead of banning the platforms, the UK is demanding architectural changes to the platforms themselves.
Correct. They are aggressively mandating that corporations like YouTube, TikTok, and Meta build robust, inescapable age verification technologies directly into the user onboarding flow.
They are demanding the implementation of facial age estimation software or rigorous government ID checks.
The philosophy is that the platforms must be legally forced to structurally protect the children who are inevitably going to inhabit those digital spaces, rather than pretending the government can successfully exile the youth from the internet entirely.
We are also seeing the structural rules of labor economics being radically rewritten, specifically in professional sports.
Oh, the WNBA.
Yes, the WNBA and its players' union are currently locked in negotiations in a midtown Manhattan hotel, inching toward a landmark collective bargaining agreement that fundamentally alters the financial reality of women's sports.
Compare the leverage of the WNBA players to the gig workers we discussed earlier.
It's night and day.
The Uber driver is isolated against an algorithm. The WNBA players possess immense collective bargaining power, and they are utilizing it at a moment of peak cultural relevance. The proposal currently on the table is revolutionary. The league is offering to raise the team salary cap from $1.5 million to $6.2 million.
The mechanical impact on the individual athlete is life-changing. Average salaries would skyrocket from roughly $120,000 to over $570,000.
Furthermore, the agreement includes hard mandates for structural improvements, guaranteed charter flights to prevent the physical toll of commercial travel, and mandatory upgrades to training facilities.
It is a direct financial reflection of the massive explosion in media rights valuations and the unprecedented consumer demand for women's basketball. They are forcing the institution to recognize their market value.
And it's not just labor rules. We are seeing the fundamental rules of how you participate in the democratic process being actively rewritten right now.
Yeah, this IFE America Act is the perfect example of this.
Exactly. And finally, the most foundational rules of all the mechanics of how American citizens participate in the democratic process are facing a massive, highly contentious rewrite on the Senate floor. The Save America Act is scheduled for a vote next week.
This legislation, heavily backed by President Trump, mandates strict new requirements for voter registration and ballot casting.
Specifically, it would require individuals to provide documented proof of citizenship to register to vote, and mandate the presentation of a government-issued photo ID at the polling location.
Now, we must examine the mechanics of this legislation and the arguments surrounding it with absolute neutrality. The debate centers entirely on the balance between systemic security and bureaucratic friction.
The Republican argument supporting the legislation frames it as a necessary common-sense measure to guarantee the absolute integrity of the electoral system. They point to widespread public polling, indicating that voter ID laws are generally popular among the electorate.
Their primary stated objective is to create a hard, verifiable barrier to prevent non-citizens from participating in federal elections.
While it is already a federal crime for a non-citizen to vote, proponents argue the current enforcement mechanisms are dangerously porous and require strict preventative documentation.
Conversely, the Democratic argument, supported by numerous voting rights organizations, vehemently opposes the legislation based on the mechanics of disenfranchisement.
They argue that requiring specific physical documentation, such as a passport or a birth certificate, introduces a massive bureaucratic hurdle that millions of legitimate, legal American citizens simply cannot clear easily.
They argue this friction disproportionately targets and suppresses the turnout of minority communities, lower-income voters, women whose legal names may not match their birth certificates, and young people who lack easy access to specialized government documents.
The mathematical reality of the Senate floor is what ultimately dictates the fate of this legislation. Senate Majority Leader John Thune is bringing the bill to the floor, but the bureaucratic mechanics of the chamber ensure it is almost certainly doomed to fail.
Because passing this legislation requires overcoming a legislative filibuster, which mandates a 60-vote supermajority.
And the Republicans do not possess 60 votes. The Democrats hold 47 seats, providing them with more than enough leverage to sustain the filibuster and block the legislation.
Furthermore, Senator Thune has explicitly rejected aggressive calls from the president's allies to fundamentally alter the rules of the Senate to abolish the filibuster threshold.
Therefore, the upcoming vote is largely symbolic. It is a strategic maneuver designed to force politicians to officially record their stance on election security mechanics ahead of the upcoming midterm campaigns.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? How all these tech and policy stories reflect a society desperately trying to write new rules for a world moving faster than its lawmakers.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. We started with naval combat in the Strait of Hormuz, tracked the explosion of global oil prices, the paralysis of commercial aviation, the localized threat of fertilizer shortages, the macroeconomic terror of stagflation, the political gridlock at the Federal Reserve,
It's a lot.
the diverging survival tactics of underemployed graduates and asset-hoarding billionaires, the philosophical battle over AI ethics in the military, the consumer tech scramble, and the rewriting of rules across sports, social media, and voting rights. So what does this all actually mean for the listener? How do we synthesize all of these breaking systems into a single, cohesive understanding?
The synthesis is that we have fully entered an era of hyper-connected fragility. The foundational illusion of the 21st century was that efficiency equals stability. We built highly optimized, just-in-time global supply chains. We built algorithmic labor markets. We built globally integrated technology platforms.
But highly optimized systems are inherently brittle.
Exactly. They lack the slack required to absorb a massive shock. The realization we are facing today is that a drone strike on a single Iranian mine layer in a 2-mile-wide geographic choke point immediately and measurably evaporates the profit margin of an Uber driver in Los Angeles.
It threatens the caloric intake of a family in sub-Saharan Africa
It forces the rapid depletion of the United States' strategic energy reserves.
and drives the interest rate on a recent graduate's credit card.
The systems do not operate in a vacuum. They are a single, highly pressurized network, and right now, the network is shattering under the weight of geopolitics.
And that profound fragility is driving the intense polarization we are witnessing. The individuals with access to massive capital Universe B are retreating into $6.7 million vintage Porsches and $35 million sculptures because they recognize the fragility of the digital economy and want tangible, physical reality to hold on to.
Meanwhile, the individuals in Universe A are downloading subscription-canceling apps and desperately transferring debt to 0% interest cards just to tread water as the cost of basic mobility and nutrition skyrockets.
Everyone is aggressively attempting to rewrite the rules, whether it's the Pentagon demanding AI that kills without hesitation, the Senate attempting to ban corporate landlords, or the WNBA players seizing their financial value, because they all intuitively realize that the old rules no longer offer protection in a world moving vastly faster than its institutions can manage.
Which ultimately forces us to reconsider the definition of security in this new era.
That is exactly where I want to leave you today. I want to offer a final thought for you to explore on your own, something that builds on the mechanics we've discussed today. If our global agricultural systems, our technological infrastructure, and our entire macroeconomic stability are this terrifyingly vulnerable to a single conflict in a narrow waterway halfway across the globe, perhaps the ultimate luxury in the late 2020s is not a $6.7 million hypercar that requires hyperinflated gasoline to operate.
Right.
And perhaps the ultimate investment is not an autonomous AI startup competing for a sprawling, complex defense contract. Perhaps true wealth and genuine, unshakeable security moving forward will be defined entirely by hyperlocal resilience.
The deliberate construction of local microgrids for energy generation, the development of localized, technologically advanced food systems that do not rely on Middle Eastern chemical imports.
And the fostering of community-level economies that possess the internal slack to survive even if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed forever.
Precisely.
Because right now, the global architecture is broken. We cannot accurately predict where the next geopolitical sledgehammer will strike the switchboard. But if we shorten the distance between ourselves and the critical elements we require to survive, maybe the collapse of the global supply chain won't hit quite so hard. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep examining the mechanics, keep questioning the algorithms, and keep connecting the dots in your own life. We will see you next time.